We're good. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thanks for joining us on the online streaming live on YouTube from the Digital Innovation Pavilion here at COP. Pleasure to be here with you today. My name's David Greenall, Global Managing Director for Climate Risk, Decarb, Nature and Adaptation with KPMG International. I am also the chair of the board of Novosphere, a not-for-profit that has the pleasure of hosting the Secretariat for the Climate Change Coalition, which has put on the Digital Innovation Pavilion this year, led by Miro. It's my real pleasure today to be joined by three panelists. We have a shorter panel, I should say, than was originally planned, but had some complications that have led to two of our panelists unfortunately not being able to be here with us today. But I think that the three that we have with us more than make up for the absence of the rest of our panel. Our topic today is on digital transformation and decentralized climate data infrastructures, and really what we're focusing on today is looking at the disruptive and transformative potential of blockchain-enabled digital technologies, as well as other disruptive technologies such as AI, IoT, digital twins, and their ability, both individually as well as in combination with each other, to really kind of foster the kind of action that we're looking for and needing to achieve in terms of achieving our kind of global challenges around climate transition, as well as on the adaptation to the impacts of climate change. What we're going to hopefully be able to dig into and drill down into are questions around where does transformative and digital infrastructure, where does that fit into this larger challenge around accessing, unlocking, and scaling climate finance? What does it mean in terms of addressing what I've referred to previously and others have referred to in terms of the crisis of trust in the carbon markets, and how it can help to address some of the transparency and measurement and reporting needs of those marketplaces, as well as what I refer to as the business model innovations and transformations that digital affords. So with that, maybe I'll ask each of our panelists to quickly introduce themselves, give you a sense as to who they are and their organizations, and then we'll jump into a kind of focused dialogue around some of the key questions that I think each of them is working on, and I think each of you will be interested in hearing about. So I'll pass it over to Wes.
Awesome. Thank you, David. And I just want to say thank you to Miroslav and the team organizing the Digital Innovation Pavilion, as well as KPMG for co-hosting with us, and the EverCity team as well. It's really great to be here and great to support the conversations around digital opportunities in the context of both the negotiation as well as supporting climate markets. So I helped lead a group called the HBAR Foundation Sustainable Impact Fund. As part of that fund, we launched a $100 million grant fund for digital public goods back in 2022. We deploy catalytic capital to both infrastructure and climate markets, as well as applications adopting that infrastructure that are focused on 5 key goals as part of our mission to bring the balance sheet of the planet to the public ledger. What we're really focused on is enabling those goals of making climate finance auditable, digitizing and open sourcing methodologies, where we have the largest library of digitized and open source methodologies in the world, scaling validation and verification, not just improving the process, but actually deploying validation and verification funding for companies in the global south who want to scale validation and verification bodies into countries where they may not exist today, regions where they may not exist today. And then as we go to deploy capital into making climate finance auditable and creating those methodologies and verifying them, build products that are based on data, carbon credits that are based on data, emissions tracking that's based on data, and the audit trail from an MRV, where we can then discover a global climate asset price as our 4th goal, to be able to understand attributes that are driven by data back to the source, not just around environmental impacts, but social impacts as well. And those assets we believe will live on corporate balance sheets, whether they're emissions, offsets, biodiversity credits, or otherwise. And we want to make ESG reporting credible by knowing those assets, their origination, their methodologies, and the data that comes from them, so that when we see an impact that a company's making that consumers can believe in, that our governments can believe in, they're auditable, the information is discoverable, human understandable, and where there needs to be offsets or credits bought, RECs bought, or any other type of environmental asset, they're liquid in a way where we can actually understand the market liquidity in a way that's not behind the counter OTC. It's a trusted market based on trusted data. And so that's us in a nutshell, and happy to pass it over to Dinesh.
Thank you, Wes. First of all, thank you, David, for giving this opportunity. And the kind of when I said digital innovation pavilion, I was like looking for something which is quite innovative in terms of the digital side of it. But we are all human now, so I think we have to exist to make the digital happening. So I'm Dinesh. I'm the executive director of the Climate Action Data Trust, which is an initiative of the World Bank, Government of Singapore, and International Emissions Trading Association. So the Climate Action Data Trust links, aggregates, and harmonizes the carbon credits data from across all the carbon registries, independent and compliance alike. And then it gives access to the various users, including the governments, exchanges, rating agencies, any form of stakeholders who are trying to get the value of the carbon credits from across the registries, which otherwise they have to visit these websites individually and then scrape the data and then do their analysis. So this platform provides a kind of a central repository of their data. We don't add any value to the data. It is just a mirroring of the data that exists in all these registries. And as we speak, to my right, have Eco Registry was already connected with us, and then we also have Biocarbon Registry connected with us, and Global Carbon Council, who have a booth here as well from Qatar. And just I came from the launch of Bhutan National Carbon Registry connected to Climate Action Data Trust just now, just an hour ago. So that's how we are embarked in this journey. And in the next couple of years, we anticipate close to 50 countries to be connected in terms of the largest volumes of ITMOs that may come from these countries. And these countries have a benefit to access not only their own data, but across the world, and then try to see the best practices and improvise their policy and regulations for kind of having a better whitelist to promote more investments and therefore greater emission reductions as well. So that is a kind of idea we are moving forward. It's a digital public infrastructure for public good, so therefore it's a free access as of now. Of course, moving forward, what will be the type of business models? How should be the engagement with the stakeholders, especially the rating agency and the exchanges who need frequent access to such data? How we can package it in a way that would be creating a kind of a real-time kind of access to the information on the carbon market. So that's the kind of a background. Maybe I'll ask you want to.
Thank you very much, Dinesh, and thanks, David, for the invitation to speak in this panel, and to Miro for hosting this Digital Innovation Pavilion. So, EcoRegistry, what we do at EcoRegistry, we started from the beginning thinking about the project developers on the field, that it was very difficult for them to get access to these registry platforms or to the standards and to talk to them. Also, they didn't know what information needed to be submitted or something. So the first step that we did is to create a platform that guides them through the process so that they can upload all the information, all the data, all the documents that will lead at the end and will support the issuance of the carbon units. And then the other part that was very difficult for newcomers in the market was to connect to the international market. So we started developing this platform in a way that it could connect to multiple platforms. It can be exchanges, but also we are working a lot with digitized monitoring, reporting, and verification solutions, like the ones that are being sponsored and by HBAR Foundation, of course, because what it will bring is a more data-driven market that allows data to be used to make informed decisions and actually bring high integrity and high quality into the market. That's our specialty, like the platform that we provide. We provide this platform for standards, for independent standards, and also for countries. So that's it. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone for those introductions. Let's dig into the issue of finance in terms of transition finance and the intersection of digital with that. To set the broad context, as we're all aware, if we look at the grand, the enormity of the challenge that we all face in terms of getting to net zero, we're talking about trillions of dollars of capital annually needing to be deployed. At the same time, in the order of billions of dollars of value potentially being able to be created in various value pools, right, around in action in this area. I think from the standpoint of capital markets and investors, they need to have. We've talked about data, right, and information that underpins their investment decision-making processes and calculus. At the end of the day, they need access to information that is credible, it's trustworthy, and it's actionable. In relation to that, I think some of the challenges, and you've already alluded to some of them, relate to issues around lack of standardization, fragmentation, lack of interoperability, and kind of opacity in terms of lack of transparency. Okay? So the big question is how can digitalization help to address some of those fundamental challenges, relating it back to the needs of investors and capital markets, so they can have access to the kind of information that they ultimately need to have in order to make those decisions and deploy the capital that's required to move investments in climate finance. So big question. Maybe if in relation to open discussion in relation to each of the things that you're focused on, maybe if you can answer that question, give some examples around what you're doing and how it relates back to that overarching challenge. Take that. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'd like to say, like when we think about investor confidence, we have ITMOs, we have voluntary carbon market credits, but we also have emissions accounting, right? And we have the ETS systems that are based on what's supposed to be credible emissions accounting. So we have hundreds of billions of dollars in the ETS systems. We have hundreds of millions to billions of dollars in the voluntary carbon markets, not including the ITMOs. And every single one of these structures, which is really a structured asset, needs to be institutional in nature. We need to have the rules of those credits that are created or emissions accounted for clearly digitized. The only way to compare them, because we can't often see, touch, or feel these assets unless we go visit a project or pollution gets very bad, we need to understand the rules and make them comparable. We need to make sure not just the environmental data is comparable, but the impacts to the communities that those credits are benefiting. So the key question is, can we prove the finance is actually going to the communities? Can we give the investors confidence that funding has gone to a specific community in a specific country that's driving this outcome to keep them incented to work on these projects? Recently, our team went to go visit a community in Senegal, and we're working on an ITMO project in Touba with Alcott, who's a large-scale project developer. And one of the key elements that Alcott's working on is making sure that in that 6.2 ITMO project, which is the first composting project in Senegal, that they're not just supporting the project, but they have traceable financing to every partner involved, so that that can be part of the same product that ultimately shows environmental data, that gives investors confidence, so that when you take an asset that exists, you can turn it into not just a low-priced carbon credit or an ITMO, but something that investors pay a premium for, because the structured data product is fully digitized, fully elaborated in a way the investors can say, this is really happening. This is real. The impact's real. The reduction in methane is real. The reduction in CO2 is real. And it helps meet the global goals of the countries investing in the host country project.
Yeah, maybe I'll also kind of echo what Wes said, but with the typical example with what we are doing right now. So we had a kind of a simulation for the last 2.5 years in terms of trying to validate whether this kind of a platform is going to really work, and then whether it would give the intended outcomes to the various stakeholders with the same data. So there is only one data, which is carbon credits data, but there are different players who are trying to use it for different purpose. So as he said, the community benefits, tracing the community benefits. For the exchanges is a simple transaction and trading for them. The rating agencies, yes, now then they are going to basically make the investment community look better, more confident by doing a lot of ratings using this data. So there's going to be a multiplicity of requirement to see how we can supply the same data, but try to help these different stakeholders across the spectrum of climate finance, so that you go for the high scale ambition in terms of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. So in terms of the use case, we try to understand from the portfolio investors who have been doing this for the last 2.5 decades in terms of trying to have a portfolio of carbon credits projects, making low difference or high difference in terms of the returns, but still they have a portfolio of carbon credits in millions of dollars, voluntary compliance, and all that what Wes mentioned. But they couldn't really make a pricing point in terms of how they could be priced and then transacted, and then they move on, and then they have it most different types of carbon credits coming up. So how do you assign the value of these credits? So to some extent, we understood that the investment community can do a better portfolio analysis of these projects, kind of an independent analysis of the credits from the same sectors. For example, if JP Morgan has a kind of a portfolio of only renewable energy from Africa, they would like to see how the similar portfolio will be comparable in another region, and therefore whether that could be a bucket of different carbon credits from different countries, and then they put a kind of a combined portfolio, the multiple projects portfolio. It's a typical example, but today they are doing it manually, and then they don't have the data, which is not kind of real time, and therefore the access to the climate action data does, the minute it has most of the voluntary and the national data, probably it is going to make a huge difference. So that is one point of it. The other one, which Wes touched a bit indirectly, is the tokenization aspect of it. What we see moving forward is that transactions that are happening beyond the primary, the exchanges, we are even now visualizing it most being traded in the market in the secondary and tertiary. As we speak, Singapore is setting up the whole framework for doing secondary transaction and host unilateral litmos, so that the exchanges can play a huge role. This has never been thought in the market yet, but Singapore has gone ahead and started developing a framework where you need all these data from the independent and the compliance registries to be hosted. And then the tokenization happens, and that gives a direct benefit to the community. If you write a smart contract, that each and every time the transaction happens, the farmer gets a small royalty, for example. It's a very simple way of traceability, but the benefit also goes to the community, and they're very happy throughout the life of the project. So these are the two examples I thought I'd give.
That's great for that. And I think kind of two things that jumped out at me in terms of your comments. I think one relates to the, well, and Wes, you also made the comment around, recognizing that there are various attributes, right, that are associated with these projects. And there's various interests and various needs in terms of different players, right? And the potential, the value that digital brings to the ability to be able to kind of assign those and provide that kind of information to different players. And I think, Dinesh, the other thing is you talked about, I started at the outset talking about innovation in digital. I think what you also talked about is on top of building off of those innovations in digital, the financial innovations that are possible, right? In terms of not going beyond just the primary markets, the primary players, into those larger pools, right? And what that may mean in terms of relating back to that overarching capital markets need and challenge. How do we bring those larger pools, those larger players into the mix, and really bring their power to the scaling needs of climate finance? So, Juan, over to you.
Thank you. And actually very important, because the first question was more about how are we going to get all this finance to all these projects and make it not just profitable, but also traceable, so that the investors feel secure where they are putting their money. So I believe Wes addressed very well the part that we need to have data that supports each one of the issues of the carbon units. That's the first thing. we need to have integration, and I believe that's what Dinesh is doing in the Cat Trust, like how to integrate all the information systems so that we can share all that information and make sure what is happening on the market. Then you need to have also traceability to prove ownership of the credits, who has the credits and who is the end beneficiary at the end of all the transactions. And the other thing that I believe that the financial market needs to really get into the market is KYC processes, due diligence, so that you can recognize who is entering the market and what they are entering it for. And in that regard, then you can have different exchanges that can provide first market, secondary market, tertiary markets. It could be any transaction, but then you will have a little, or not little, but less liability on counterparty risk, and you can do some specific things about insurances that you could do on the projects or on the credits themselves. And those solutions will come when we have all the mechanisms in place to do traceability, data-driven decisions, and KYC process, and connectivity between all platforms. And I believe that's what we have all been working together to achieve. It's not easy, but we need to learn from the financial sector that has already implemented such things.
Thanks for that. And picking up other parts of the finance ecosystem. I'm thinking about insurance. I ran a panel yesterday on the integration of DMRV and insurance, right? And how you've got large institutional players. We had Aon on the panel, right, talking about what they're doing, as well as various startups, and how they see the need both from a project developer standpoint as well as from a corporate buyer standpoint around insurance risk protection products and services, and how that will help to scale. But fundamentally, they as insurers, it goes back to they need to have confidence in the underlying information around the projects in order to be able to write those covers, right? So all of this kind of comes together. I wanted to switch to another question, and picking up on kind of a cross-cutting theme. I think I heard the language of digital public goods, open frameworks, open standards. So there's kind of a cross-cutting common theme around each of you. Wondering if you can drill down into, and you've touched on this a little bit already, but into some of the benefits associated with open approaches, but also talking about, in addition to the benefits, what are some of the risks, and what are some of the safeguards that may need to be put in place to be able to have those flourish and function?
Yeah, so I think one thing that we need to think about is digital public goods. It's infrastructure. What is infrastructure? It's a tool, whether it's a road or a digital MRV framework system, that allows multiple parties to use it and scale something that wasn't happening before. And so if we treat our tools as an information highway, it needs to make it easier for someone to build, say, a methodology, compare a methodology, access data quicker than they could before, enable maybe the work of the validation and verification bodies to be compared, to enable reputations to exist for project developers and other market actors, including registries, to improve the quality, to improve the transactability of the assets. And so as we build infrastructure, it needs to speak in a common language. I'd highlight that as a risk. It needs to be based on, and that language doesn't need to be specific at a technical level, at a specification level, though it does. And so there's really great working groups that exist across the industry that are trying to address some of those risks. But those risks, we'll find out over time if they've successfully addressed them. One of them is the Interwork Alliance from the Global Blockchain Business Council. They've actually started a few different task forces. One is the Voluntary Ecological Markets Task Force, and they've really defined what is it, not just a tokenized carbon credit on a blockchain, but that digital asset, whether it lives in a database or a blockchain, how it's related to measurement, reporting, and verification. And that's thinking about the behaviors, the characteristics of the asset, even the actors involved. The Carbon Emissions Task Force has done the same thing. Actually, this past week, released their first paper defining what is an emission, so scope 3, but also product carbon footprints, that's aligned with some of the other specifications bodies in the industry, including the Pathfinder framework, e-liability institute, and the Open Footprint Forum. And so if we don't follow specifications for our digital public goods and our infrastructure, I'd highlight that as a risk. But the opportunity is scale. The opportunity is to build systems that all talk to each other. So if the HBAR Foundation funds a piece of infrastructure and Eco-Registry adopts that infrastructure, and then all of a sudden Climate Action Data Trust can understand, just by understanding at an API level, the specification, maybe we can build things that work together and that scale the market. And I think that's a key opportunity from our perspective. And when we go to fund, we try to fund things based on standards, and we try to fund infrastructure that solves critical market problems that haven't been addressed. So for us, MRV frameworks, marketplaces based on attributes are key areas where specifications and frameworks are helpful, and we think digital public goods are very promising.
Yeah, no, but I still remember when I first met Wes online, he mentioned one key aspect of it. He said the source has to be referred. If you don't refer the source or source the reference properly, whatever you build across doesn't make any sense. So you come back where you started, because you have to trust the source. And once you trust the source, that gives you the whole chain, the value chain. Because unless you have the project, the data that is a kind of attributed to that is not properly referred, everything is wrong. So the digital aspect is also equally exposed to that. And that's the only risk I feel, that the data is not coming from all three of us at all. The source data that comes from the field. So therefore, the kind of educating and engaging them to properly give the reference data the way it can stand the time. We're talking about 100 years for carbon forestry projects. So the data from the source from the day one becomes the risk as well as the solution for a successful digital infrastructure. That's my major premise. And he nicely put it to me, actually. Whatever you build doesn't make any sense if you don't have that kind of an access to give the right reference data from the source. We're talking about the documentation to start with. And on the other hand, the tokenization aspect of it, and trying to really see how the community benefits, which I mentioned to you, happens. The traceability becomes a bit more onerous if you introduce more systems, more checks, and then more processes, which are going to be very tech heavy for the ultimate community. They don't have any clue what you guys are doing, but at least they have the belief that it is much better than before, because they can see what's happening, basically. So from that angle, the kind of my entire premise goes to the community, basically. Whatever the question is largely because of the ways the open source is trying to kind of completely revolutionize and transform the kind of understanding and access, equally becomes a challenge when you don't do it properly on the systems which you mentioned. And then the normal threats and the hacks and all those issues which any IT guy would like to resolve, it becomes very clear rule book, or the engagement of rules of engagement from the day one. And therefore I feel, if you understand that and you have the building blocks properly kind of ensure that we may have different tools. We may compete with each other for various aspects. That is not kind of a material issue. But the most material part is to understand how to simplify that aspect and make it very palatable to the community that is going to understand and appreciate what you guys are doing.
So I'm not an expert on public goods and open source code. I use it though a lot. I'm very good beneficiary. So what I can tell is from my perspective, or from our perspective in the company, how we see, for example, the work that HBAR has been doing and the work that the CATROS have been doing. I get asked a lot why I engage with the CATROS, why we were, for example, the first registry connected to the CATROS, or why do we work together with the HBAR Foundation. A lot of questions about if I don't fear losing the IP or something like that. A lot of people asking me that. And my answer is open source opportunities, digital goods, digital public goods, what they bring into the table that I believe is very valuable is the ecosystem. They start bringing an ecosystem of different players that want to implement real solutions that actually focus on climate action, but also are doing something. It's not just the purpose of a specific company, but it's the purpose of the whole ecosystem. And I believe that's when such organizations come in place and bring this to the ecosystem, and that brings a lot of value to the solutions. That's from my perspective.
Just before handing it over to you, only one aspect is the governance, which we again discussed, is that the governance part is not fully now centralized or decentralized. It's like everybody sets their own governance in terms of how to access the open source, what are the threats, and how do you overcome it. I think that part also has to be kind of there has to be an alliance of governance for the open source, for the climate at least, and that is an entity called DIAL, DIAL, which is kind of a UN outfit. It existed for few kind of open source public digital public good, and they have a wonderful background in terms of how they can take this forward. So we are talking to them and trying to see how the governance and the transparency issue could be resolved by having a kind of a well adopted guidelines for the governance setup as well.
Thanks for that. And maybe the last question is, and picking up again some comments around, what's ultimately critical here is the data at source, right? So talking about those projects in the field, in the communities, how that information is, that data is captured. Yes, my question is, in terms of the ability of the communities that you work with, their ability to understand, accept, embrace digital and what it means in terms of how that information is gathered. Maybe you can bring that to life in terms of an example of a project that you're working on. I think you were talking about just recently being in Senegal for a project. So maybe that's one to speak to, but maybe just to give everyone a sense of what that looks like on the ground in terms of how that source data is captured and then how it flows into everything that we're talking about in terms of broader infrastructures.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. And one thing I'll say is when we talk about source data, a lot of times, as technologists, we jump to just sensors. But sensors are just one data point in context. We oftentimes have to bring data with context in climate projects. And most of the times, even when sensors are enabled within methodologies, they're oftentimes not adopted because the technological cost barriers or the technological complexity barriers on, say, communications and backhaul, basically communication systems so that we can write to the internet, write to the cloud, or wherever we're taking data to. And so that's one of the big challenges in the markets. And we have project developers we work with who literally, we were here at last COP and they were describing how they collected data on little, not sheets of paper, slips of paper, but they ripped off small pieces of paper to write down cook stove readings to better monitor their cook stove. That's how they started back in 2010 when they were building cook stoves for gold standard, long time ago in the carbon markets spectrum. And those same cook stove developers, it's a group called the Nova Institute in South Africa. They've actually worked within local communities in Limpopo, outside of Johannesburg, and they've set up sensors on the side of cook stoves that they built in homes working with local rural women. And they've added sensors for ignition starts and stops to better understand heat, temperature, and other sensor elements. But they also have to consider the privacy of, by adding a sensor to someone's home, what is that implication? And that's not where we just start with monitoring. It's having source monitoring from folks who are helping set up the projects, going into homes, doing kitchen performance tests and field studies rather than using standard estimates, which a lot of times the cookstove projects use. And so that's one specific example, but oftentimes we're thinking about beyond a sensor, beyond a specific field study, to be able to go do samples that go into labs and understanding where every single party, whether it's the lab itself or the folks who are collecting the sample or the folks who work on a farm every day, they're collecting data that contextually goes into the project. Now, one thing I'll say, and I'd love to hear maybe Juan's feedback on this as someone who works with registry technology, is many of the methodologies in registry technology don't account for collecting data that low level, that granular. And so there's an opportunity for us for registries to allow for more data to go in, but also consider the privacy sensitivities of that data and making sure that we still get the context that we're looking for from the source, whether it's satellite data, on the ground data, lab data, or sensor data, and how those things work together to give the right context of that truth, and making sure it answers the question of the methodology, but we don't flatten all that information into a PDF where we can never use that data again to actually derive the attributes that the markets may care about. And at the end of the day, that attribution that the market may care about could often be benefited by us not creating a PDF that's in black and white in 2 dimensions, and we can get all the richness out of that data without mining it for privacy-laden information.
Perfect. No, and thanks. I'm going to answer first what Wes was just talking about. So and how we are engaging in that. We're working in some of the projects together with the with uh, beneficiaries from the HBAR Foundation's grants. One thing that we're developing for that is there are two ways of doing things. I always believe in change and innovation, but it is difficult to make change when the other stakeholders in the market are very difficult to change. One thing and one question that arises when Wes was telling about how to gather all this data and put it into a registry system is then the validation and verification body, so the auditors, they need to change their mindset because they will change from reading black and white to the PDDs, as you mentioned. They will need to change from that to change to actually go and review measurement systems and find, for example, rare measurements, stuff like that, and then audit algorithms more than audit paper. So that change is very difficult to do. So how we are addressing it from our perspective is that we do both at the moment. So we collect the data. With the data, we can do dashboards and everything, but we also automatically generate an Excel sheet and a PD file, so so that the auditor can read it, and then we have auditors that are more tech savvy, and so to them we present, okay, here you have the dashboard and the data, and the ones that are not so tech savvy, here you have your PDD. And you can read it if you want. So that's how we are addressing that question, and I believe that's a very important question right now because it will need to change the market view of the process. So that's from one hand. And then coming back to the example, one that I love, and we just got the results before I traveled here to Dubai. It's about using LiDAR and ultrasound technology for measuring afforestation and reforestation projects. The difficulty there is that if you, and this is a project that we started in Colombia. I come from Colombia, and we started there when people started using satellite imaging to rate projects. And then everybody knew that satellite imaging in the Amazon forest does not help you at all. If you ever have seen a screenshot of a satellite image from the Amazon forest, you will see only clouds. If you're able to see something, you will not be able to understand what is happening on the field. So actually, we started a project with a university, with a local company, and with an afforestation and reforestation project that we did actually the old way of measuring everything, that you have to measure tree by tree with height and everything. And we did it with LiDAR technology, with ultrasound, and with satellite imaging, the three of them at the same time. And we then started developing algorithms to match actually what you get on the field. And right now, we're very confident, and that's actually let's call it a verification company that is offering that services. But we, as a registry platform, we help them into saying, okay, let's go into this together and let's try to build your company actually, because because this was our efforts, but they are the ones providing the service afterwards to do the verification process. And we do believe that those results will come in the future very often. And I hope, I really hope that will come, because and every single country, every single area is different in a way. For example, at the beginning, we tried to work with the MIT, for example, and with another university in Europe that I don't recall which one. And then they were very enthusiastic about their technology. And the only thing is, when are you going to fly here? And they tell, no, we're going to do everything in satellite. And I just took the phone and tell them, like, you're not going to do anything, but if you have something, just call me. And it was like that. And then they told me, but the Andes, if you look at the Andes from a satellite, you cannot see the steep, and then this and that. And I told you, like 1 year ago. If you're doing this with satellite imaging, don't bother, man. Let's try something new. But actually, those guys, they saw then the project, and they are now working with us. Okay, let's try how to implement a solution that really works for the Andean region, and we can call it the Andean region solution. And then in Africa will be another one, and then maybe in Europe will be another one. In the US will be another one. And it's different for every region, and that's very important.
So maybe I'll just add. I won't take more than a couple of minutes here. My response will be from the extent that we have from the building the CAD trust data taxonomy, and me being already in the old carbon days, we know how the PDD was initially designed by the UN, and then how the whole data methodology was moving forward. So being one of the meta experts and the roster of experts of the UN, we always found exactly what Wes and Juan was mentioning in terms of how what is the adequacy of data, and whether there are 200 parameters is adequate or 500. So it goes to the number of parameters, and rather than the actual need of that data, which is going to live long to continue to show the value of the project. So basis that, whatever simulations that we carried out for the last 2 years with almost 15 standards, which are in the public domain, or doing various projects. So we have that data taxonomy now cut down from 180 parameters to around 81 parameters, co-parameters being only 40. But we feel definitely the users are going to come back and then say, no, we need more, and then we may have to expand. So the kind of standard, the understanding is different for different people in terms of how they want to have the standard. So this is one part of the story. The second one is what is going to happen now when voluntary independent market is going to merge or converge with the compliance market. What kind of standards you're going to talk about? A couple of days before, we had a statement from EU talking about having all the voluntary independent standards to have a unified standards. Will it happen? Answer is no, it's not going to happen. But that's a way forward in terms of how you see the unified standards of the independent market to try to make a huge compelling case for merging with the compliance market. Whether you like it or not, is going to happen. But I think the push has to come from the 500 methodologies or over, from the independent standards and the compliance standards. It's time to basically address that.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And maybe we'll turn it to the audience, but before to see if there are any questions. But I'll just mention to the panel here what I'll ask each of you to think about over the course of the next minute or so is leaving us with one kind of key takeaway in terms of Dinesh, picking up on your, where to in the future. What's one key, if you're going to focus on one key thing that's critical to tackle and kind of really move the yardsticks forward? What does that look like? So I'll put it out to the audience. Any comments or questions? Yeah, absolutely. You're on the hot seat.
Hey, I'm Anton from Singapore. Network effect. So the technology is great, the data sourcing, got it up and running. How do you build enough network effect to make this meaningful with the large FIs and corporates around the world?
So when we think about network effects, it doesn't come from one solution. A registry needs VVBs, project developers need buyers, buyers need customers who believe in sustainable products, net zero products. So there's network effects in kind of a horizontal sense of the entire value chain, but there's also network effects in the vertical sense of these types of solutions. So when we think about tools like the Guardian, which is that open source digital public good that we created around measurement, reporting, and verification, we've built the largest methodology library in the world. But how does that digitized and open source methodology library get adopted? It's by getting feedback and commentary as we go version to version to version. It's how we build a system of knowledge around methodologies that actually makes the methodologies better. If we don't make the methodologies better, we're not going to have the effect that we want to have on the market. But it's up to us to engage with different parties to use those methodologies. So what we've done is when we build in layers, we have that Guardian, we have the methodology library that lives on top of that with dozens and dozens of methodologies available today, emissions, offsets, and otherwise. What happens is then we go work with partners like Alcott. And Alcott says, okay, I have projects in multiple different registries, and they have hundreds of projects that affect hundreds of communities, over 500 million metric tons worth of credits tied to those projects. And we say, okay, well, how does that work with Eco Registry? How does that work with the other registries? How does that work with their VVBs to work across that value chain? But ultimately, what we're working on is building those high quality data products that buyers are going to say, I have confidence in this. I have confidence in the data behind the asset. I have confidence that the rules exist today, but they're getting better in the future. And I have confidence that I can see the financial flow, that when I invest in this, I don't just see the money going to the project developer, the registry, the VVB, but what goes back to the communities. And so one of the key investments we made this year is in our partnership with Alcott is to work with them on opening the books. And what that means is we can understand the dollars into the same accounts of testing data, the same sources of testing data at the organizational level. We can watch financial flows go back into those communities. And so you say, well, what's the network effect here? We have the vertical network effect of the methodology library. We have the vertical network effect on all of these players understanding how to receive value and how to attest value in a digital sense. But we also have the network effect of corporations are now seeing, where does my money go? Where is the data coming from? Am I now paying for an asset that is based on a brand, or is it a data-driven product based on attributes where I know where the data comes from that derives those attributes? And that's the type of network effect that we look at horizontally in the value chain and vertically in the different categories of that market life cycle. So those modules that Juan was referencing.
I would just add to what Wes said that with this data-driven solution give us the opportunity to make a continuous improvement over the process. And that is actually what at the end gives confidence to the market. One thing that we cannot do, and from my perspective, is like, okay, this doesn't work, let's go to another. But that doesn't work, let's go to another way. And that doesn't help anybody. Actually, then what we see is something is failing. For example, one thing that we are also working on is also with Alcott and the HVAR Foundation is the financial disclosure of the impact and the real impact in the projects. And that's very important because that has been questioned about a lot in the carbon market. So how is the beneficiary to the communities, and that's very important, how to trace back all that information and be able to show here that's how they are spending their money. So those are just small steps, but from lots of small steps you can do something better.
Okay. Any other questions?
My name is Ibrahim. First of all, thank you, all the panelists, for your insights. It's really helpful. My question is, we are trying to develop national climate data sharing platform in the Maldives. And we have found like two key challenges. One is in different government institutions, they are storing data in different formats. Most of the data is in printed form and then PDF, and also you have Word documents. So the challenge is like, developing the data schema and coming up with a standard isn't to feed in the climate data sharing platform. So what would be your advice or suggestion to address these challenges? And the second challenge is like the ownership of the data. Who owns the data? Even though it's a government institutions, different institutions having like saying that, no, we own this data, we are not ready to share the data. So this is a huge challenge. So even though the government is working for the uniform cause, it's a huge challenge.
So I think we can break that into a few different areas. So one is the specifications around data and the others around privacy. And I think that there are some elements of we have good examples out there on what data sharing could look like or should look like to make it high quality, but still respect privacy. So in the emissions side of things, the Pathfinder framework has different, even ratings of good, bad, and better, or bad, satisfactory, and better in terms of how you rate the level of sharing to prove the data quality. But in the carbon markets, we have certain data standards that the Interwork Alliance or the Global Blockchain Business Council has released in the Voluntary Ecological Markets Task Force. So recently, in the last few months, a digital measurement reporting and verification specification came out. It's version 2 of that specification. Recently in the HBAR Foundation, we've supported the funding to adopt those properties, is what they're called. There's 197 of them as part of the Guardian framework. So it's literally a drop-down menu of those properties to implement that specification on top of Hedera, but also by projects. Some of those projects are actually working with one eco-registry team. So it's actually easily interoperable when you see what Juan has done, and just by leveraging what's out of the box. And then you can take that, if you have a cook-stove methodology or a renewable energy focused methodology or any other type of methodology, you can see even comparable fields, what that looks like. Now, if you say, how does that apply to an ITMO? If you're using the same specification and you write out the methodology in the same way, you should be able to look at them side by side and understand what property next to another property across the different standards. Now, in some cases, some of that data should be private. It should be PII. Maybe in certain very limited situations, there's proprietary information that has to be considered. Although, especially when you're creating an offset or credit, we encourage it to be open as part of our principles as the foundation. There's a concept called selective disclosure. Now, selective disclosure, oftentimes in the emerging technology world, we hear zero knowledge proofs or other types of variants of that. That selective disclosure means that your private data is going to stay private, but you want to publicly log that that's there. And the way that we do that is when we open source the methodology, we can say this field has a confidential checkbox. So when somebody answers it, we expect them to sign a transaction in a certain way where the information may be left on the local device, or an encrypted hash would be put on a public ledger, so that you can actually know that, hey, there's a question here. There's an answer to that question. But if you want to understand the answer to that question, you need to go through some type of workflow to either get permission to that, or maybe you can't access it anymore because that's a very specific piece of proprietary information or personally identifiable information that needs some further verification that if you're entitled to access it or maybe use it. And in the case of a government, the government oftentimes may be entitled to see it, but may not have the right to share it with somebody else. And so that's the type of technology that is available today that maybe wasn't available 10 years ago to help facilitate that credible disclosure of information without violating someone's privacy or proprietary information.
I would just add something, and some efforts that have been done, for example, by the World Bank. About they have this program called the Climate Warehouse, actually where the Cat Trust came from. That was actually the origination of the Cat Trust, is a project called the Climate Warehouse. They have advanced models about standardization for data models and how to collect data, for example. That would be one thing. The other thing is how to manage privacy. And of course, I would then recommend that there are also other standards like ISO 27001 and SOC 2 standards, like to manage privacy and data management systems. So yeah, my first thing would be look at vendors or platforms that can offer you both of the tools, like using standardized information models. It could be the World Banks, it could be any other, to connect, for example, to HBAR, or that they can manage that information, but that they also can give you the confidentiality and access to the information that is confidential.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Recognizing that we've got about 1 minute left in our allotted time, we did a great job taking the full hour. I'll turn it back to each of our panelists just to give that one top of mind takeaway in terms of a key thing that they see as an opportunity or a challenge moving forward in advancing all of this.
I'd say the key opportunity, in our digital innovations that we each work on, is building systems that don't have to be the single point of control, but collaborate to achieve the outcome. We're better when you have every single logo here that's a co-host or a sponsor or a participant in this pavilion working together to achieve climate outcomes, working with host countries, working with countries that are trying to innovate in addition to the private sector actors to achieve those outcomes. And oftentimes we get very focused on our specific issues, but we have to listen to everyone else just as much as we have to share what we're working on. And I think that's the opportunity for all of us as we take our reflections back from COP, but also think about for the rest of COP, what we're bringing to COP is that collaboration and trying to collaborate towards the goals.
Exactly. I'm going to say the same thing in different words. What I heard yesterday was we always are very good in talking at people and not with people. I think whatever that's why I started the conversation like the digital may revolutionize, transform everything, but it's ultimate for the public good or for the community benefit. We are doing all this stuff. So I think the top down is never going to be successful at all, and that's how you have the success of the Paris Agreement, which is going bottom up, and therefore talk with people and not talk at people.
Yeah, for me, is one thing is the ecosystem. Building the ecosystem is important, and the challenge that we face is the thing I mentioned earlier about when we see that some solution is failing, like throwing it away and then starting a new one, and then throwing it away and starting a new one. That doesn't help anybody. Thank you.
All right. With that, I'll conclude today's session. Again, a huge appreciation and thanks for each of our three panelists and to all of you that are here today and dialing in. So, thanks very much.